And it's a privilege to follow Sarah's fantastic storytelling. And one of the ways in which we can collectively transform our economy and get our organizations to move closer together to collaborate is to storytell. So obviously we want to communicate through our APIs and our API documentation, but there's lots of doom-filled stories about the planet and getting to net zero. But we need to tell transformational stories about how we're going to transform our economy to become green and digital. And in that context, we can start to bring our organizations close together in terms of how this is possible. So Mehdi's team for Apidays London this year is the path from open banking to embedded finance. And the path to net zero is a path from open banking to embedded finance. And in the context of climate damage, it's probably an essential path we have to travel. So today I want to throw out some questions as a storytelling exercise based on assumptions, and all business strategies are based on assumptions as foundation stones. So why will the path to UK's net zero need green digital ecosystems? And then secondly, how can traditional lending use embedded finance in these green digital ecosystems? So the green transition is an enormous technological and cultural challenge for us all, but it's also a massive capital allocation problem. If we can devise the right technologies and project the right behaviors, but if we can't get the capital to it, it's going to take us way, way longer. And that includes both equity capital and debt capital. So embedded finance, we talk about technology, but it's also finance. So in that context, let's make some assumptions. Well, a realistic assumption, I wish it was wrong, I hope it's wrong, is that no green swans will arrive soon, and that financing in the next decade will primarily be around deploying mature green technologies to drive the information architecture of the economy. And one data point that's quite instructive, obviously it wasn't an emergency, but the first solar cell for a solar panel was demonstrated in 1954. Okay, and yet we walk around and we don't see them on top of every building. So in that context, it takes a huge amount of time to commercialize green innovation. So yes, there's a huge amount of effort going towards 2050, but we need to, as well as we think about miraculous new breakthroughs in terms of how we power the planet, there's an important task for the API economy, which is to participate in the deployment of existing green tech. So in that context, this is a data sharing challenge, because this deployment covers permits and finance and installation and maintenance and monitoring of those technologies. So first call out in terms of our assumptions, the stuff that's ready to go, it needs to be installed, people need to commit to investing in it, and that needs to be financed. So an opportunity, an assumption that embedded finance needs to consider. Second, data sharing collaboration across all verticals will start to assemble a digital twin. And we're already seeing extensive policy papers from the European Union that are directly connecting high-scale data sharing across enterprises and across industry verticals as essential to the green transition. And we can expect the underlying spirit and purpose of regulation to look at that very, very closely. So in broad terms, there's all of these different communities that are increasingly trying to build digital twins of what they're doing. The community that looks at building efficiency, or the community that looks at transport and congestion data. But it's insufficient that they get better at sharing data amongst themselves about the climate impact they're having. We have to share this data across those verticals. And that can't be done with customized projects and point-to-point integrations. So implicit in all of this is the ability to share data one-to-many at high scale, where the data is pulled out and not pushed out. And to my layman's understanding, that sounds like the API economy. So in that context, these digital twins, they're not going to be identical. We can't sit in committee meetings for the next 100 years defining standards. We have to make progress. And the way in which these digital twins can communicate with each other, and probably the only way they can communicate with each other at scale, is with APIs. Okay, so in the context of our storytelling about the API economy, it's crucially important that we increasingly engage with sustainability specialists and people who are investing in sustainability to make sure they understand that this high-scale data sharing and partnering that they're increasingly focusing on has to be enabled by the API economy. So another key assumption, every type of physical asset in the UK that can damage the environment can have a digital twin with an API that emits data about the physical asset. And now we're starting to move into the domain of finance, because all of those things that my world-class graphics are illuminating, that's collateral. That is collateral. The reason why your interest rate on your home loan is 6% and not 16% is that if you don't pay back your home loan, your lender will take the home. Okay, and there's a vast amount of our economy that runs on the efficiency of collateral management, and it's massively important that the new green and digital economy also gets debt capital. If we only get into a position to apply equity to new green technologies, our new economy is going to be way, way smaller than the existing brown economy, because long-term secured debt drives the scaling of the mainstream economy. So in that context, we need to think not just about green technologies, but also green collateral. How can a long-term lender be confident that if the unfortunate event that they have to repossess the asset 12 years down the road, that it will have retained its market value because it's been transitioned to green? Again, the API economy is crucially important because, when I was a child, we were told that you throw something away, and only now, belatedly, we're learning there is no away. But in that context, the value chain for a repurposing secondary market needs to be as digitized as the primary market. So increasingly, the mainstream economy doesn't just have digitization of supply chain for the inputs it needs to produce goods to be sold. It also needs a secondary digital supply chain for the effective end-of-life treatment of the stuff we use. So in the context of that, you can't have point-to-point integrations and one-off projects to collaborate digitally with your providers of primary inputs. You also need to reuse your data assets and your digital assets with the providers of secondary market services. So again, the API economy has a crucial role to play. Your enterprise needs to move towards API strategy, so it's highly efficient in terms of expanding the range of suppliers that it uses in relation to its climate obligations. More assumptions. And again, these have a broad margin of error individually, but the more we accumulate them, the more we can build some certainty into how we might build business strategy. So co-location of industrial clusters, this already happens a lot in relation to suppliers and buyers in primarily business-to-business value chains. They locate closer to each other for pragmatic and cost reasons. And it's reasonable to assume that this can only accelerate, that there's a good correlation between distance and environmental damage. So, and as increasingly related industries want to optimize, low carbon or zero carbon fuel sources, or carbon capture and storage, or circularity of what they're doing, or the sharing of talent in terms of energy efficiency, that we can see an increase in industrial clustering. There's a downside to globalization. So increasingly, geographic distance is going to come back into strategy in a big way. So when you think about the mindset of this industrial clustering, obviously geography matters, but also coordination mechanisms and organizational boundaries. Coordination mechanisms need to scale between these organizations, and organizational boundaries need to blur. That's what happens with the geographic clustering. And you can make the exact same observation about the mindset in digital ecosystems, that coordination mechanisms need to scale and organizational boundaries need to blur. So in the context of this, APIs are crucially important in terms of carrying out the high-scale data sharing that will be needed to optimize physical industrial clustering. So broad-scale observations about how increasingly a green economy is a highly connected digital economy. And again, using the European Union as a good example, their openly articulated policy is that these are twin transitions, absolutely twin transitions. And they're producing as many policy documents around the data sharing of services in this new green and digital economy as they are about fuel sources. And there's research in major industrial economies like Germany that suggests that by 2030, they can achieve a third of their climate goals just by accelerated digitization. Don't have to change the fuel source, although they will, but accelerated digitization can get them 1/3 of the way there. And all of the strategic use cases, digital twins, smart mobility, smart agriculture, smart buildings, all of these things, the API economy has a fundamental and foundational role to play. So back to our theme in terms of the path from open banking to embedded finance. Let's get to the money bit, which is crucially important. So how can traditional lenders, and I'm very much thinking about mainstream lending, where the major lenders have a significant source of cheap funding, a deposit base, and they're in a position to do long-term secured lending if they can get collateral that they can monitor and that they can value and that they can trust in the long term will retain its value so that your interest rate is 6% and not 16%. So first assumption, some things are not going to change. So there's a huge amount of goodwill and desire to transition towards a green economy. We have a responsibility as a generation to make sure that our children and grandchildren enjoy the earth. But consumer behavior is going to remain curious and impatient and demanding because that's ingrained in our behavior in everyday life. And no amount of goodwill is going to get past that if we can't remove friction from the customer journeys to enable people to go green. So the first thing about the curious customer is that we can assume realistically that they're going to research everything about their green transition on non-financial digital surfaces before any intent is formed to finance that change. Okay, and the green transition is enormously diverse, whether it's a homeowner or a business or a transport system. There could be 20 different projects from 20 different providers that have to be valued and invested in and executed over an extended period of time. And that's a lot of project specification to be done, a lot of data to be shared. So this is not going to happen. The positioning of green loans where they need to get to is not going to happen on banking apps. Okay, no banking app or banking website can contain the sheer diversity and volatility of this project specification that needs to take place. The financial element, which is a crucial part of the research, needs to be embedded into the customer experience that's taking place in the non-financial digital surface. Absolutely crucially important. So we're in the early phase of banks and lenders that are massively dependent on making sure they can retain access to good collateral, and they're marketing their green loans through their own digital surfaces. But the API economy needs to provide these extended customer experiences whereby somebody who's looking at a project and playing with the specification and playing with potential providers and playing with the duration can also play with the financing of that project simultaneously. And that's an extended connected digital experience that can only be executed efficiently across the economy by the API economy. Okay, so this curiosity will be on non-digital surfaces, and embedded finance needs to be present to make sure that curiosity can lead to action. And they'll be impatient. The digital economy has made us all impatient. I want the answer now as I'm walking around, as I see something. I want to know now what I'm going to do. And this is a crucial thing for those of us who are interested in developing the API economy and make it mainstream, because the research shows that solar panels diffuse based on peer-to-peer diffusion or neighborhood effects. Okay, so there's some villages where there's plenty of solar panels on the roofs, and this is an easy thing to research because you can physically see them, and there's other villages where there's none. Okay, and they might be equally wealthy and equally creditworthy and equally able to invest in solar panels. But what happens? Somebody gets them at number 12, everyone looks out the window, then somebody gets it at number 18, then somebody gets it at number 37. Okay, so in that reality, there's things happening, the customer journey towards, putting solar panels on the roof, which may require embedded finance. It begins when somebody takes a digital photo of the side of a van parked outside their neighbor's house. We have to get embedded finance into that extended digital experience, because as lenders, we can sit in our lovely offices and use direct marketing to try and communicate with everybody who's creditworthy that they should borrow money to put up solar panels. But that is not going to drive adoption. It's what their neighbors are doing is what's driving adoption. So as a financing industry, we need to get our services as an option into those extended customer experiences. So the research is there for that. So in the context of those of us who are trying to promote and develop the API economy, we need to connect to those communities that are looking at sustainability strategies to make sure they get foundational knowledge about the role that APIs and how they will enable this high-scale data sharing across industries and across enterprises. So the one thing we can be certain about in the context of what's ahead of us in the next few decades is uncertainty. Okay, so the one thing that's uncertainties. So we're going to see more and more volatility. And in that context, the volatility could be investment patterns. You know, with the best will in the world, equity investors and venture capitalists still need to be very careful, as they need to be, in terms of what green technologies are going to succeed, which ones are going to be adopted. It's going to be volatile across the planet. Okay, so in Germany, river flooding, in the Netherlands, coastal flooding, in Australia, wildfires, you know, the impacts are going to be different, and the financiers in those markets are going to have different solutions that they want to finance in relation to that. So there's going to be volatility. There's going to be volatility in public policy interventions. There'll be subsidies, there'll be penalties. And this is going to influence and make demand more unpredictable. Some people will wait for subsidies. Some people will only react when there's penalties. And there'll be volatility of green tech adoption. As financiers, we'll have to figure out how we tap into those villages where the solar panels are appearing on the roofs, and then identify the villages where they're not, and figure out how do we get vans on the street with finance inbuilt into the digital customer journey to make that happen. So aggregate assumption, business models need to capture business opportunities, must not get locked into temporary demand patterns. So if you don't get locked into temporary demand patterns with partners that don't actually capture where demand is going, don't do customized projects, don't do point-to-point integrations for digital journeys, use APIs because they're modular, reusable, and you might have to move on to a new partner or a new technology. And then lastly, you know, bear in mind that some of the partnerships you have in the short to medium term might be fantastic, great partner, wonderful customer experience, API powered, but that person is doing a heat pump or a solar panel or a vehicle or a factory upgrade that gets superseded by a better technology and a better partner 4 years down the road. Okay, so you've got to build optionality into both into your demand capture and into your partnering strategies and be able to execute them at scale. And that also comes back down to the API economy. So I know Simon Torrance shared yesterday that, you know, financial inclusion is a path from open banking schemes to embedded finance, and it is, and it's a moral imperative, as he points out, and he's right. But this is also incredibly important for our collective well-being, and it's very, very important as those of us who evangelize for the API economy that we get ourselves, you know, into the sustainability story, because increasingly there's a theoretical understanding that a green economy is a highly connected digital economy. So we can optimize everything we use, and this data should travel across organizations, but we need to educate and engage in how to make sure that the coordination mechanisms that can be consumed across enterprise boundaries are API powered for repeatability and efficiency. So I'm not trying to make it sound easy. I'm trying to make it sound important. Any questions on that?
Thank you very much, Paul. Thank you. Yeah, we have one question here. We totally see the link with the embedded finance aspect. Yeah.
Thanks. Thank you, Paul. We've seen emerging markets like India or China, where CO2 consumption is still pretty high, investing quite a lot in green energies like electricity or hydrogen. What do you think the role of API could be in terms of redistributing worldwide energy produced by these greenhouses?
I think you're absolutely right. Whatever the initiative is that would involve optimizing what we consume, whether it's across country boundaries or across industrial boundaries, there's no doubt it can only be data-driven. So, at the moment, everyone's sitting at individual enterprise level, wondering how can they possibly, as an enterprise, develop a business strategy that's going to contribute to net zero by 2050, way beyond the pay grade of an individual enterprise. And I think we should only look at investments that, that we can justify to our shareholders, and that we can be pretty certain are going to be relevant and can make a contribution. And this is why I worry sometimes about greenwashing, because in the funds industry, they talk about dark green and light green. So dark green is an investment that could definitely make the world more sustainable, but light green is an investment that could be used for sustainability. And digitization is an investment that could be used for sustainability, but could be used to pollute the planet even further. Okay? But because of this desire to avoid greenwashing, I think we're missing the fact that for many enterprises who are, maybe not directly generating energy or involved in energy policy, what can they do to contribute towards the journey to net zero? And the answer is digitize. Be digital, be highly digitized, be able to collaborate across, enterprise boundaries with others. So what I think for all of us who are involved in the management of individual businesses, we can't make a big impact on, geopolitics or macroeconomic policy in relation to of how the entire economy transforms. But what we can do is make sure our individual enterprise sees its own digital transformation and being ready and able to partner with who it needs to partner with or extend into wider customer journeys, that increasingly, yes, digital transformation might just be light green. You can use it for green or brown purposes, but a green economy is highly digitized. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but what I do find is that sometimes we get up into very, very high-level things, whether it's brand new energy sources or macroeconomic or geopolitical things. But for the vast majority of people who are involved with individual enterprises, the only thing we can do that's going to make a contribution towards this and can be easily justifiable to our shareholders is accelerate our digitization in a way in which we are able to open up our business model and data share when we need to do so.
Yeah, we have time for another question. Yeah, upstairs. Up, 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 up.
Thank you. Paul, that was a superb update. My name is Mark Stringer. Just wanted to build on your point a few moments ago and thinking about what the API industry can do. And it just dawned on me the proximity that Bill Gates has to folks like Warren Buffett, and indeed how indeed advocacy at that level, as you say, geopolitically and also from a capital allocation perspective, could actually mean we've got a relatively short proximity to that conversation. So I just wouldn't mind your opinions on actually the greater proximity you may or this industry may have to that debate.
Yeah, well, that's a great observation. That in reality, those two titans of their industries, one technological and one financial and one investment, sitting close side by side, does illustrate, and it's a great point, that this green transition is a combination of technology and investment and capital getting to the right spot. So I think increasingly, we need to recognize as technologists that the day-to-day data that we are managing and we're helping evolve the use of data on a day-to-day basis, that data is the seed corn for capital allocation. Okay, whether they're equity investors or long-term secured lenders, they can only confidently allocate capital when they get the data to do so. So, long-term lending is easy. It's easy to make a yes or no decision very quickly when you have all of the right data. And the lenders need leads. So if you think about if a lending bank takes £1 million or €1 million or $1 million away from a fossil fuel business, it might need to find 5 new green loans of 200,000 each because the green economy is only emerging. Okay, so that's 5 customers to replace 1. And because the green economy is only emerging, to maintain credit quality, because we don't want the banking system to go bankrupt, the bankers might have to say no 95 times for loan applications to say yes to 5. So in that context of taking £1 million away from a brown loan and to start shrinking that part of our economy, the banker might need 100 leads for a green loan. And they could be very, very diverse leads on diverse green projects. This is not going to happen through the banking app. This can only happen through a digital ecosystem where demand can be aggregated into our lenders. So illustrating on that point, those 2 titans sit side by side, and we really need to get more aligned and, yes, think like technologists in terms of evolving the API economy, but recognize that we are increasingly generating the seed corn that the financiers need to make sure that capital gets allocated to the green transition effectively. That getting the money there is probably in the round just as important as getting the technology invented and designed.
So are you saying that with the democratization of green consciousness in people and their ability to invest themselves into more decentralized, like whatever, infrastructure or stuff, banks need also to decentralize their offer by embed it where people will be able to make these decisions for solar panels, electric cars, or whatever it is. So embed your value proposition, which is also more sustainable for many things, but in people's life when they make sustainable decisions. Can we resume it like that?
Absolutely. And bear in mind, in the non-digital 20th century, the way bankers embedded in the economy, it was branches. So they wanted to be where people spent hours every day. So they opened up branches. But it was highly inefficient, it was paper-based, and increasingly people moved online. So now people spend hours every day on non-financial apps. And they're going to spend hours on non-financial apps looking to see how they might become more green. So I would argue that those of you who are in the API economy, you are going to enable the branch bankers of the 21st century, because you're going to enable those lenders to embed where people spend hours a day living their lives, where finance might be a requirement, and we have to give them the option of using financial services. So you need to enable those branch bankers, because a bank with 1 branch can't diversify, can't capture demand, can't be where people are. So you are enabling the branch bankers of the 21st century, and it's urgent that we do it, and it's important that we do it, because they need to get a lot of green leads so they can say no confidently to a lot of them, but we still make sure that we're getting capital into the evolution of the economy.